Mail here over subscribe, so I got a mailbox and I got a bunch of other links if you want to send me some comics or whatever. So Obi-Wan director, some idiot's advice for new Star Wars. Don't get hung up on the Star Wars of it all. Weird advice. Weird. It's like I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, but it's like someone who's got a few extra pounds giving diet advice. The only thing you could say is, this is what I did to get a little chubby. So you probably want to lay off the high fructose corn syrup. You want to cut the calories, and especially cut the junk calories. Everybody knows cookies are not good for you, and spinach generally is. So with all of this stuff, you got to realize right off the bat. I mean, how many of these stories do you need to see from this section of YouTube that Star Wars is over? Like Disney is also, and Hollywood itself is. I know it says lots to say $150 billion company is in trouble. It's headed towards trouble. That you can very accurately say. But Hollywood itself, which by Hollywood's got to be what, $1 trillion plus industry, it is going to fundamentally change forever. Trump 2016 to 2020 had a huge impact on Hollywood. The TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, absolutely real. I mean, like it should be in the DSM, whatever, as a diagnosable mental affliction, because there's people who are permanently changed by by just a mild. Trump would have been, I don't know, he would have, like, oh, he's so far right. You look at his policies, you're like, no, he's not. You're just making yourself worried over nothing. Anyway, but then the 2020 BLM Antifa riots, that like helped Hollywood to go to accelerate in this direction. Those two things are going to change the face of Hollywood. Where big Hollywood, I don't think is going to be big. Oh, this is her. What an idiot. I don't think big Hollywood is going to be the big Hollywood you remember it. I mean, the thing is, you still have those great movies from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then after that it kind of tapers off. There's no shortage of classic black and white films to go back in the 40s and 50s, and just amazing films. And then, yeah, somewhere within the past 20 years, it just became less and less watchable. So first of all, nobody at Disney, I mean, the hubris to give it'd be like giving advice on like high fashion modeling or something. I couldn't even name a high fashion brand when 90% of the stuff is coming from Target, or at least used to before they got insanely woke. So first of all, nobody at Disney should be given any advice. And no, I never drank Anheuser-Busch. Any advice about anything dealing with movies or public relations, because everything they make sucks. Their movies, the streaming, Disney Plus, the parks, the Star Wars hotel. I forget what it's called, like Galactic Cruiser or something, where it's a $250 million hotel. And the ticket prices for the hotel were off the hook. And yeah, there are like a lot of people if you're going to Disney annually, unless you live in Florida, that area, California, you're pretty well off. But there still has to be a reason to stay in this little claustrophobic hotel that looks like a Star Wars. And there's not, when the vibe of Star Wars has so radically changed. I mean, the time for this would have been. A long decades ago. I mean, if you wanted it successful, and it very much could have been, all you had to do was make movies that connected with an audience. But those movies aren't woke. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they're and they also have a cruise line, and that's also like across the board they're down. If it wasn't for old merchandise sales and old IP sales for like the old animations and stuff. Like I was thinking about that, like what keeps Disney afloat, and it's probably like a Mickey Mouse T-shirt or PJs for the kids. That stuff is always going to sell because you remember it from the 70s and 80s and 90s when Disney was at its peak. When it's not now, but I mean nowadays, like I see Disney stuff and I kind of think it's like that symbology people talk about with the island type of things, like to make they managed to make Disney, Mickey Mouse, and all that kind of stuff nefarious to have a sinister connection over a period of like 5 years. All they had to do was just not get involved with the Florida politics and not have the BLT stuff in the background of the movies. No offense to everybody, but it's like it's better to be blunt about stuff. That's just not connecting with enough people to sustain an industry. And if you pander to the 1% or even the 5%, you're going to go out of business. And even $150 billion company, yes, they do go out of businesses. So they should not be giving interviews about anything until they have a come to Jesus moment and decide to get out of identity politics and start making family friend. No, they're never going to have a come to Jesus moment. They're having a come to Moloch moment right now, and start making family friendly movies again without the subversive political agenda that they were so famous for in the 80s and 90s. I mean, Disney was unstoppable at that time period. So the woke propaganda is not selling. You don't have to be left or right to look at Star Wars, Disney, or Hollywood in general to know that they're losing their audience. No interview with her or anyone at Disney matters until they fix the direction the company is going in. And call me crazy, I don't think they will, because I think this is a religion to them. So if you're making Disney Plus streaming shows that aren't being watched, you have a staggering lack of self-awareness to give advice to future directors. I mean, the fat analogy is the best analogy. I look at these people and go like, what are you talking about? People, why are your lips moving when nobody's watching your stuff? All this, there's like 8 Star Wars streaming things that came out. Some have been, I think, bigger hits. Not hits. I don't think any of them have been hits. Some have been more successful than others, but they've all underperformed. And they have one coming out, not Andor. Andor came out, and I think The Acolyte is coming out. It's like, that's another show that's just, you're probably going to lose another $10 million on. Anyway, you should not be giving advice. Why would they listen to you? And the thing is, you have this guy, Ewan McGregor, who's still alive. I don't know what he's in, his 40s and 50s. The thing is, in the Lucas prequel movies, he looked like he was in his 40s in that movie, and now he still looks like he's in his 40s or 50s. It's 15, 20 years later. So I guess it is, if you know you're going to use the actors for a long time, put a little gray in the beard, try to put a couple lines on their face, age them up a little bit. Anyway, so all their advice is meaningless when your shows are failing. The only advice she could give is just what not to do. And she can't really say anything else, because even if she wanted to go in a different direction and make it look like, oh, dare I say, the original Star Wars, she wouldn't be allowed to. That's not the direction Disney is going in. And the thing is, it would be inconceivable for someone in her position, or someone at Disney in general, or anyone to even broach that conversation of, oh, what if we, tried to go in a different direction. It would be the needle scratch on the record. They would look at you like, what are you talking about? Or the meme of the guy getting thrown out the window when he has good advice. So Disney's committed to this bit because they don't think they're the problem. They think the audience is intolerant istophobes, which both things can be true. Out of all their Disney Plus shows, I think the Mandos started to get the audience back after that crappy trilogy and then the Solo bomb. That was, I think, their turnaround point, the possible turnaround point. But then they fired Gina Carano, and they also did it in a disrespectful way on Twitter, or at least they gave the reason on Twitter, and nobody wants to hear a billion-dollar company air their dirty laundry about an actor that didn't do anything wrong, and the actor that is also well liked. So it feels like Disney isn't professionally run anymore. Like, young SJWs are now making the decisions, which I think very much is the case. And they're also in an echo chamber. They also seem to think that Disney money is going to last forever. And ultimately, they just don't care that much, because they're there to push propaganda. These are who is that guy drinking Kool-Aid, David Crush or something? These are the true believers. They really are on board with this kind of stuff. Like, the Trump derangement syndrome has something to do with it, because that was over nothing. That was just a bunch of nonsense, where they strawman this argument in their mind, and it turned out to be completely false. It's like they just wanted something to be like the hashtag resistance and all that kind of nonsense they did on Twitter for like 4 years. So if someone wanted to turn Disney around, if Bob Iger decided we're going to go in a different direction because we have a fiduciary duty of due care to the shareholders, they would have crying sessions. And I mean, they would get on Twitter anonymously and talk about how they need therapy because Bob Iger decided to don the Hugo Boss and have a company that actually makes money. So this chick doesn't sound like a fan of Star Wars or even familiar with it, which is just inconceivable to anyone who is even mildly a fan of Star Wars. And you look at these people making these $100 million decisions, and they're not familiar with the property. You're like, how? Why are you there? How does this happen? I mean, ultimately, a lot of it is they're there because of woke points and diversity stuff. I mean, a lot of it, like you look what happened in Maui. People go, it's intentional. I look at it, and I go, that could just be negligence from having incompetent people across the board. Like you see it more and more in America as more and more incompetent people are taking these positions where they have to make decisions, and they're making. I guess I'm off track a little bit, but I'm going to do this for Odyssey and BitChute, not for YouTube, because it's haram. They had an interview. Like, people are doing deep dives into that topic, and there's some interviews with some of the people involved, and they're insane. I mean, like insane SJWs where they wouldn't release the water for. Anyway, so that's on Odyssey and BitChute. The thing is, if you change everything about a property, the thing is, I was just in that town like a couple of years ago, and it's like literally the town I walked through. I have photographs and video of the whole thing. It's just brutal. Anyway, if you change everything about a property, it's no longer the same thing. Obviously, updating something and they're canceling a STD, Star Trek Discovery, after 5 years. Which honestly, that's 5 years too long. Yeah, you were probably subsidizing that for CBS. So updating something for a modern audience is what they say when they kill something. I mean, that's like you could put that the RIP, put it on a gravestone for these intellectual properties. They did it to Star Wars, Willow, Witcher, Rings of Power, Charlie's Angels, Terminator, Ghostbusters, and probably a bunch of other stuff also. To the point where people trust Hollywood less than the media and the government, which there should be zero trust for them. Star Wars has to exist in the established canon, otherwise you run into inconsistencies like with the Disney trilogy, where they had fuel issues in their ships, but it was never an issue before. And you had the stunning and brave purple-haired SJW fly her ship into another ship at hyperspeed, except they just could have used hyperdrive missiles or had a droid or computer plot a ship. And if the concept is already on the table of this, faster than light travel to use, mass times acceleration or mass times velocity squared, then both sides would already be doing it already. It would have been within the canon. Like, if it's not already established by the first 6 movies and the ton of books that have already been written, you can't put it in at 2015. It doesn't make sense. That's a simple logical flaw that destroys the movie because it's so childishly bad. I mean, if you're an adult, if you're over 15 or even 12, by that time you're learning about science and science fiction, and if you're familiar with this concept, you'd simply ask, why weren't they doing that before? Why didn't they use a droid? Or why didn't they use a missile? Or why didn't they program the computer to take a mass? Like, the physics. Even in America, people understand the physics of mc squared. Anyway, so she also says that they don't know what George Lucas meant by certain lines or scenes in the movies. So why didn't you pick up the phone and call him? Or when they bought the rights, that was like 2010 or something, why didn't they sit down with him or other Star Wars experts and try to understand the story? Like, go over all three, the scripts of all 3 films, the 77 ones, and just go through every piece, make sure you understand it piece by piece. And if it's not even him, there are other experts. There are people who have like YouTube channels dedicated to Star Wars lore, and they probably know more than George Lucas himself. Why wouldn't you do a little research? It's a $4 billion property. You can take a few months to do some research, right? Like, the person who's I guess that'd be Kathleen Kennedy, maybe the person who's overall in charge of it. Shouldn't you be taking some notes? Apparently not. So they act like they're coming into Star Wars cold, and their whole treatment of Star Wars has been so freaking bizarre because they paid billions for it. You should have gone back to the roots of 77 to 83 Star Wars, and they would have had a huge hit on their hands. Instead, they have something that is turning out to maybe be responsible for the downfall of the company. And I know that sounds weird to look at like a $150 billion company, but they're talking about selling off ABC, Fox, FX, and a bunch of other subsidiary companies, and possibly being acquired by Apple. I don't know how that works at like the big company levels when they're like, they just own shares of each other. But And you know, it's not like Apple's any. Is Apple less woke than Disney? If so, not by much. Like I don't think they're going to save it. But I mean, Apple is I think it's the biggest company on earth for a reason. I don't know what number two is. Maybe Google. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys all next episode.